sense. And I'm pleased to say I am joined by former Conservative government advisor Claire Pearsall for the whole 3 hours. Claire, it's lovely to have you in the studio. We both have done our best, haven't we, to
Very
look festive. I
Yeah.
know.
It's a team message, seriously.
Either festive Republican or Labour Party.
Not that.
Definitely not the last.
No.
Anything but the last. Let's rattle through some of the stories, shall we? Royal Mail have been accused of faking deliveries. One assumes this is all down to targets. This is in order to preserve yearly bonuses. Postal workers claimed they've been told to record some parcel deliveries as inaccessible, even if they've never attempted to deliver the item. That means customer operations managers would still receive their mid-year bonuses, understood to be based in part on, there you go, hitting targets for the number of parcels that leave Royal Mail depots. Now, the thing I've got with this, I mean, I'm sure my postman is a lovely gentleman. I just never get to meet him because once upon a time the Royal Mail used to come before you went to work.
Oh, yeah,
before you left the house. Now it's like a sort of random time of day. You don't even know when they're going to be around. So when you know you've got a parcel being delivered by the Royal Mail, you're like, well, I'll get that when I go pick it up from the depot in about 3 years' time. I mean, this morning I left my house and I sort of wrote in Sharpie on a big piece of paper, sellotape to my door, if you come and I'm not in, leave it with number 8 because, you know, it's Christmas. They need those things.
And I think that's where the majority of people are. And your neighbours are pretty good. I've got really good sets of neighbours. We take parcels in for each other all the time. But you never know when the postman's going to come. We had some post delivered at 8 p.m. the other day.
It's so random.
Why? Why not do it in the morning? Where was he in the morning? If this is his normal round, and he's a very lovely postman, we've seen him a few times, absolutely lovely chap, but you sort of think, well, what are you doing for the rest of the day that you have to be there at 8 p.m. at night? I mean, also, surely for him that's not great.
Yeah, and also, you know, when it's let's obviously fit through letterbox, but previously I'm pretty sure that the standard thing was, if you're not in, we deliver to a neighbour. Yeah. And most other places would, most Amazon delivery drivers tend to do that, not always, but most do. Some of them just leave it in your bin, weirdly.
Yes.
But Royal Mail, you know, you have to now go through the faffery of having missed it, go online, you know, go to this, redeliver it on a different day altogether, then pick it, and then if they're not in, because you don't know if your neighbour's going to be in at the random time of day that they're going to pick. It's just, it's like ping pong, isn't it, with Royal Mail? You're like, you're holding my parcel hostage, just give it to anybody who's in the street.
But also, it tells you to nominate a safe place. So I thought, well, I had to do a redelivery, and I thought, well, OK, let's have a look at a safe place if they can't deliver it. In my back garden is a pretty good bet. But the options were shed, porch, conservatory. I have none of these items.
They give you a drop-down menu. And you're like, what if I've got something that is not on the list? But you don't really have the other option,
and I didn't. So I said shed, and then I put helpfully in notes, please leave by the back door, because it's a secure place. I live in a village. It's a very secure place. It's absolutely fine to do that. The back gate was open. Everybody's now knowing that my back gate is open. But, you know, it was stupid. The list was pathetic. I don't have a conservatory, and if I did, surely that would be locked, because that's access to my house.
Yeah, exactly.
So it was just a really random list of things. But
the other thing that drives me mad while we're on the subject of Royal Mail is that when you're sort of, because in my house, you know, I live in a terrace, and when someone knocks anyone's door, you think it's your door. Yeah. Anyway, you're waiting for something, and then you hear the knock on the door, and it's always when you're in the bath or putting your makeup on or something, and so you go as fast as you can, like Roadrunner, all the way down the stairs, and you get there, and it's the bit of paper, and you're like, what is the time range in which you give before you? Because in theory they fill out the form before they put it in. Either they've got the quickest handwriting in the world, or they've just decided, but before they've even got to your door, that you're not in, because. I need some sort of special rope, like the milk tray man, to swing out and snatch it.
I mean, that would be fun, wouldn't it? To actually sort of swing down and scoop the parcel out of their hands.
Fireman's pole, give it.
But they're 12 digits long, those reference numbers. So you just sort of think, how have you done that by squinting at the parcel in the first place? I'd have to go and find my glasses to start with and write it down. But most people have really good neighbours, and you think the amount that you have to spend on postage going through Royal Mail, you expect it to be delivered, at least attempted, not just sort of scanned and said, "Oh, we can't be bothered." So
I feel a bit sorry.
On a bit.
I feel a bit sorry for Royal Mail though, because back in the good old days when they delivered stuff and on time, they were allowed to deliver stuff and on time. That's the thing. It was actually an EU Postal Services directive that broke up the Royal Mail and said, right, everyone can now compete for parcels delivery, and that's how they earn their cash money.
Yes.
And of course now no one gets letters anyway because we're digitised, and the Royal Mail are just sort of picking up the scraps at the bottom, and we all expect them to be as brilliant as they ever were when they've been cut to the bone, hemorrhaging money, and I kind of miss it.
Yeah, I do, especially when you look at some of the companies that have taken over deliveries. I had one who sent me a message saying, "We've delivered your parcel at 10:20 at night," and sent a photograph of somewhere that was not my house and a little map to say, "Yep, it's here, definitely here." So at 11:20, I could be found walking round the village to locate my parcel on someone else's doorstep.
There's one particular company, I think it's DPD, that are sort of weirdly specific in their timings. They say, "We'll deliver your parcel between 15:39 and 14:08.
Yeah.
And you're like, that is not even a round number. That's very odd. How did you come to that figure? Talking about coming to figures, Reform hopes to get 11,000 more members, which means that they would overtake the Conservative membership figure. Conservatives, 131,680 members, apparently. Reform, 120,549. That was at noon on Monday. And they think that they might be able to leapfrog the Tories within a month.
I'm not surprised. I'm really not surprised. Reform are offering different things to the Conservative Party. They are making themselves more relevant. They're making themselves available to the youth market, which the Conservatives seem to have forgotten and have done for at least the last 20 years. They seem exciting and different. I think it's a piece of top trolling to have an online counter every time somebody signs up, that it goes over. I've seen it on social media, and I think that is superb to see it in visual, sort of real time. But what's it going to do? You need to be able to turn those membership people into volunteers, and then into votes and into electoral success. So yeah, having a membership system that is large is great. Are these people going to come out and deliver leaflets for you? Are they going to stand as candidates in local elections? Are they going to stand at the next general election? That's what you need to look at. You need to start forming that base, forming your membership into something useful.
What's interesting, though, you know, I was out for a really good dinner last night with an American TV exec, a big cohort of us. Every time he comes to UK, he gathers people together to find out what's going on over on our little island. And there are a number of pollsters and journalists there. And all the pollsters, you know, they just, Nigel could be Prime Minister by next time round. And once upon a time, that would have seemed absurd. It would have been like, oh, come on now, that's, whatever. But people are just saying it quite calmly now. And I think with these things, with narratives in the media, is when they're picked up and just, you know, constantly repeated, they become fait accompli. I think about Labour winning the general election. Now, we know that Sir Keir Starmer got far fewer votes even than Jeremy Corbyn when he lost the election. A few of them, 1 in 20 people of the voting population actually voted for Labour, and yet they've got this massive majority. And I wonder if the media hadn't sort of said for months and months all that year, oh well, Labour's just going to win the next election, Labour's going to win the next election, and it had been handled differently, whether the result would have been different, because very often this stuff seeps into the public consciousness and they think, well, I'm not going to bother voting because they're not going to win anyway, and you end up with a distorted result.
You do, and I think people are fed up with politics, so a lot of people didn't vote, so hence why you get this enormous swing to Labour. I think a lot of the Conservative votes either went to Reform or just stayed at home, quite simply. Whether Nigel Farage can be Prime Minister remains to be seen, because I think there's an awful lot to be done in between now and whenever the next general election's going to be. But you shouldn't ever write them off, and it really does irritate me when people just go, it's a flash in the pan. It isn't, and you're not listening to what's going on in the politics world.
I mean, I used to work with Nigel a lot. I was his right-hand woman for a long period of time. And if there's one thing I should say about him, he is spookily prescient when it comes to politics and knowing what's going to happen. And he said to me a number of years ago now, the next election, the Tories will lose it, Labour will get a big majority, we will get a foothold in Parliament, and the election after that we can win it. He said this a number of years ago. And at the time even I thought, all right, that's a bit optimistic, but, you know. But I know by now that actually when he says this is winnable or this is going to happen, he gets it right every time. He puts issues on the agenda. You look at the narratives now. I remember when I first started working with him, and he was just like, I want to leave the EU, and people were like, oh, you can't, you racist, you monster. Well, now we've left the EU, and then he used to speak about the increase in crime when you had the accession of Eastern European countries. Oh, you can't say that. He sets narratives. He says things before other people dare to say them. He actually shifts the Overton window. And I think what's happened now, especially with Elon Musk buying X, is that Overton window, what is acceptable to say out loud and publicly, where political conviction has moved, has now gone very much onto the reform bit of the spectrum. The Tories are going to have to scramble to catch up. But the problem is people will look at the last 14 years and say, well, you did that. You did the immigration figures.
They will, and I think that is the problem the Conservatives have, is that they haven't covered themselves in glory. They started off very strongly way back in 2010 in those early days of the coalition, and you sort of thought, OK, this is a party getting back into power. But it went wrong over the last probably 6 or 7 years when you start looking at it. The way Brexit was handled, the way the public were treated for voting for Brexit, just gave the impression that the party didn't care. And I think that has stuck with them. But what Reform have got to do is actually appeal to a wider audience than they have at the moment, because they have got a broad base. They did get an awful lot of votes at the last election. Was it 4 million people voted for Reform? That's enormous. However, that was at that particular moment, and you've got to build that momentum going forward. You've got to look at the areas that you weren't perhaps as strong, and what's your messaging going to be? Nigel is one of those people that's very adept at changing the message slightly for each place, but it's a big ask to change that across all of those constituencies.
Yeah, it is indeed. But, it's going to be an interesting political period we're entering now. And, let's see what happens when it comes to donations to the party, whether Elon Musk does actually assign a big charity cheque addressed to one Mr. NP Farage. But before we move on, actually, what do you make of what I consider to be multifaceted gerrymandering by the Labour Party? All of the things that they're suggesting, we might not have those May elections because we might want to restructure authorities. OK, all right, Banana Republic tyrant. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, we might have to look into the rules about donations to political parties. This is after we know the Labour Party themselves have taken donations from people who are from abroad, essentially. And then it's like, well, we might have to move the voting age down to 16. What other trick are you going to pull up out of your sleeve to try and make sure you stay in power? It's disturbing. I think we should be alarmed as the public that they're trying to do this. If this was happening in an African nation, we'd be like, wow, that's corrupt.
Yes, it is. And it always reminds me of my son being younger and playing Monopoly, where he was losing, he didn't like it, so he decided to change the rules to make it fairer for him, not for anybody else playing. That was by the by. And this is what strikes me with Keir Starmer, that let's lower the voting age because young people want to vote. But he's completely ignored the fact that the majority of young men are actually more right-wing. So what's that going to do for him? And then moving the local elections because you think you might like to restructure, or is it you're not going to win? Is that what you're really scared of?
It's one thing when you get the odd, periodical boundary change, which the Conservatives have whipped at from time to time, but to come into office and actually go after who actually is franchised to vote, whether elections even take place, and how parties can, what money they can receive. They're three quite big things. This isn't just tinkering around with the size of a constituency. And I think I do think it's alarming. And as per usual, the legacy media just sit there reporting it. And you kind of think, if it was a Conservative party who said, we're going to put the voting age up to 25, frankly, because most people still live at home with their parents until that point. We're going to look at the way that the unions are funding the Labour Party. We're going to cancel the local elections because we think that, authorities are too X, Y. People are like, this is corrupt Prime Minister. Labour Party's doing it, and legacy media are just like,
It's almost as if they've not really paid attention. They haven't noticed. They don't want to notice. But they should. This is democracy. The elections are set. Local people have a right to decide who runs their local authority. The Labour Party shouldn't be telling them that they can't have that.
Yeah. No, I genuinely think it's gerrymandering of the worst order. Remember the petition?
Yes.
Oh, I remember the petition. Do you know where the petition's at now?
Oh, is it gone up to nearly 3 million?
It is over the 3 million mark. This is, of course, the petition that Sunbite Sol put in place calling for the Prime Minister to resign, for there to be a general election. Apparently, it is going to be debated in Parliament on the 6th of January. Now, it'll just be done as a novelty act. It'll be sort of, putting paid, it'll put paid to the suggestion, but lip service as well to feigning democracy. And it will probably be treated as a bit of a knockabout and as a bit of a joke, I'd imagine.
I don't know, but I think because it's got so much attention now, so it'll be a debate in Westminster Hall, so you'll have a minister there who is going to regret their life choices at being a minister at that point. Because everybody that's got a problem is going to come into Westminster Hall and stand up and say that. So I think that they aren't going to get an easy ride, and it isn't going to be allowed to be just lip service. And because it's televised, we can all tune in to watch exactly what is said, who has said it, and what the minister does afterwards. So I think actually it's going to be quite interesting. It's not going to change anything. We aren't going to have a general election on the back of it. But I think that some of those contributions will be extremely useful when you look at what's going to happen with the May elections.
I think the only thing that have made that petition better than it was is if, a bit like the Queen's funeral, there was a queue to sign a physical copy of it. Someone sort of had a big sort of medieval style scroll standing outside Parliament, and a queue was snaking around the streets of London, and people coming from all over the country to put pen to paper. Well, there you go. There's an idea for the new year. If it's debated in Parliament and the general election doesn't happen, it's not going to.
Yes.
Then there you go. There's a fun little Phillips idea. We're going to take a short break now, but